What possible connection could there be between people marching around a city and the walls of that city coming down? What connection could there be between a man standing over a body of water and holding out a staff and those waters parting? For that matter, what possible connection can there be between a mother being on her knees, interceding for her child, and the course of that child's life many miles away? This is not biblical heroism. It illustrates an important spiritual principle, and that is that physical acts open spiritual doors. The things that we do, the actions that we take have a profound impact well beyond just the sum total of what those actions created. You've heard stories all weekend about one faithful act after another, of one individual after another, and it having a ripple effect, profound effect, many miles away, throughout generations, enabling ministry, encouraging ministry, raising up ministry, just because one person did one act in obedience to the Lord. One single act done in obedience to the Lord has far-reaching impact. And much of it, my friends, is incalculable. If you bless someone, if you come to their aid, even some small act of charity or support, you not only release a spirit of generosity over your own house, over your own business, over your own life, you release a blessing over that individual, and who knows where it goes from there. Physical acts open spiritual doors. It is a profound principle of the kingdom of God. A lot of people miss the point. They don't understand how our actions release certain spiritual dominions. I've had to learn that, sometimes painfully over the years. When you act, listen to this, when you act in obedience to God, you release the spirit of obedience. You release its dominion. You release it over yourself. You release it over your household. You release it over your bloodline. You release it over your business. You release it over whatever God's put into your hands. You release that spirit of obedience. A lot of people don't understand that. They don't understand the converse of that as well. That when you disobey God, you release the spirit of disobedience. See, a lot of people think they can do something and disobey God, and if they don't get caught, well, it's okay. But what they don't understand is that when they've disobeyed God, they've released the spirit of disobedience, and they've therefore come under its dominion, and it becomes their master. A lot of people get fooled that way. That's how they get into a lot of trouble. That's how they get in over their heads. It then becomes their master. That's why it's always easier to sin the second time. It's not just because you've worn the edges off your conscience. You've released the spirit of disobedience. It becomes a pervasive dominion, and then it becomes your master. I really think that that's part of what Paul was talking about in the 6th chapter of Romans when he said, don't you know, brethren, that when you submit yourselves to someone to obey them, you become a slave to them. Whether it's obedience, which leads to life, or sin, which leads to death. Physical acts open spiritual doors and unleash spiritual powers and dominions. And a lot of people don't understand that. Wasn't a big deal to raise his hands. Wasn't like brain surgery. By the way, if any of you all in here are neurosurgeons, congratulations. You're the one we refer to as the hardest job in the whole world. Well, at least it's not brain surgery. Well, rocket science. If you're an astrophysicist, I guess that'd be in there too. Wasn't a hard thing. Wasn't a difficult thing. simply raising his hands, a gesture, a physical act, charted the course of a major battle in the valley down below, and lives were at stake. I'm one of these guys that raises his hands in worship. I guess for a lot of you that is tantamount to a confession. Wasn't always that way. I didn't start out that way. Wasn't raised in a church that did that, and I was well into my pastoral ministry before I even fooled around with stuff like that. I felt, I realized I don't do that so that I might say, hey, look how spiritual I am. Look at me. It's not that. I just found that in my own life, I needed that. I needed that physical act to unlock my own spiritual doors. That it's so easy for the passion and the faith that we have to just kind of remain cloistered within our own mind or heart. And I know you may think it's a silly act, but I want to tell you a lot of little acts have profound consequences. And for me, it was important. The last 14 years of our pastoral ministry were spent at a church in Athens, Georgia, which is our home. And there's a man in that church who is probably one of the dearest friends that I've ever had. One of the greatest Methodist laymen with whom I've ever had the privilege to serve. He's significantly older than I am, and he was a very, very, very traditional Methodist. Very. And he was raised, you see, that in church you don't move, and you don't budge, and you don't make a sound, and you don't sneeze or giggle or wiggle or burp. Because if you did, you would incur not the wrath of God, but the wrath of your mother. And he was raised like that. Somehow that got labeled reverence. But that was his tradition. And here I come with my spiritual verbiage and my hand raising. But we loved each other and still do to this day. Deeply love each other. Which can only be the grace of God, honestly. And I cherish that God brought us together because I love him with all my heart. But one day we were riding down the road. I'll never forget this. And he's driving his car. I don't even remember where we were going. And the whole subject of raising hands at church came up, and he wrinkled up his face and he said, you know what I don't understand is how y'all know when to raise your hands. And I said, well, here's how it works. On the back wall behind the altar, way up in the corner where you can't see it, there's a little light. And when that light comes on, we raise our hands. That's a joke, folks. That's not really true. There's a guy in the back just turned to his wife and said, honey, do we have one of those lights in our church? I just found it was necessary to release my own spirituality and to intercede as hands raised in intercession. I'm not trying to advocate for that here. I'm just trying to make a point that physical acts open spiritual doors. And you see, and if you look at that narrative of Moses on that day, it wasn't just that he did the act of raising his hands. He was willing to persevere in it. I can't help but draw a parallel between that and our own worship and intercession, because that's where these acts of obedience begin. That's where they're found.